Weapons. I have three things I like and three things I disliked. Ultimately, I came in on this movie, I put it pretty high in the impressive category because I think overall that it's showcasing Zach Cregger as a talent that we need to pay attention to. I feel the same way about this movie that I felt about Midsummer and just Ari Aster in general. Following Hereditary, or Hereditary itself, had me thinking Ari Aster is going to be someone we need to pay attention to for years to come, and I think that's proven true, except his sophomore feature, Midsummer, I didn't love, and that's mostly because cult movies all kind of follow the same pattern as the cult initially comes off as normal, gets progressively weirder until everybody dies or one person dies. It's just the same thing every time. And Midsummer, while stylistically cool, didn't really do it for me in terms of the story. Same thing with Weapons. Barbarian is a movie that I loved. I thought it was excellent. I was really excited for whatever Zach did next. And Weapons, impressive again, and showed off in a much larger way the talent that we saw with Barbarian. Especially, Barbarian still uses this multi-perspective structure that Zach really liked and used in Weapons, except it's reduced. It's just three character kind of perspective switches that we get in the movie, where Weapons takes it to the extreme and is like all the characters, much more like Pulp Fiction, much more like Magnolia, much more like a Robert Altman film. So I liked that. I feel like Zach is living up to his potential in the way of being this filmmaker that we really should be listening to, watching, paying attention to, and that for years to come, we're probably going to get like banger picture after banger picture from him, and I'm excited about that. And then Julia Garner, I think she's excellent in everything she gets to do, except, Silver Surfer first steps, because she barely got to talk. She just got to stand there menacingly a lot. But her and Amy Madigan really carried the movie. I liked Josh Brolin in this, but I didn't really feel like his character got all that much to do. And then Alden, I don't know how to say his last name. Iron Reichen. He's great. I thought that he was excellent all the way back in Tetro. I don't know how many people have watched Francis Ford Coppola's Tetro, but he was a young upcoming actor in that one, does an excellent job. So I've been excited for him to kind of break out and be a thing for a while. And this was another movie that felt like it's pushing that along. I like the humor in Weapons, which is strange to say because it seemed like it was going to be such a heavy movie. But actually the middle portion, when it's kind of abandoning horror as a genre, was my favorite part of the film, when it was just more of a Paul and James and what was Benedict wrong, or like Marcus's characters. Like even like Archer, like Josh Brolin's character, I thought even in the grief components, when it was getting away from some of the more horror elements early on, the movie was stronger for it. But that then brings us back to the flaws. And there's three things that I really want to talk about that kept the movie from being like in my favorites tier. I don't think a 10 out of 10 is something where it's like absolutely perfect, but it just crosses a certain threshold of like excellence that I put it up there, whatever flaws there are. But these ones were big enough that it just didn't reach that point for me. But the filmmaking itself and the scope and scale was so impressive. That's why I gave it that 8 out of 10 rating. But the three flaws. First, the structure. I don't like when movies are overly reliant on the mystery, because I almost feel like every single time it's anticlimactic. Like nearly every single time I get a reveal in a movie, like this is what the mystery was. I'm just like that, like that's really forced. I mean, Us is a perfect example. I think Us is a great movie until it tries to explain what's going on, and then it becomes so ridiculous and so hard to take seriously that the movie kind of falls apart for me in a lot of ways. And a lot of TV shows have actually started using this structure, which is infuriating to me. You've probably watched one or more shows where it starts off with a mystery at the beginning of the season, and then the penultimate episode is a flashback that gives you all the context that you've been missing out on this entire time. And now you understand why like characters were acting a certain way. And then you get to the finale and we finally get to move forward with the plot. I hate it. Hateful Eight was the first movie that made me realize I hate this structure. And even what's Nolan's Dunkirk is another one where he goes out of sequence in that movie, and it's not even earned. It's just a formal thing that he does because he doesn't want to start up start off by setting everything up, because that's so much setup that it takes a long time to get to the action. And I think Nolan's aware enough that mainstream audiences, if you're going to make a movie that appeals to them, and Nolan appeals to mainstream audiences, you have to make something that is has momentum to it very early on. So he structured Dunkirk in a way that got to the mystery, avoided the mystery, but it got to just showing stuff early and then started flashing back and messing up timelines of when things were happening. So like all the boat stuff in Dunkirk happens way before other stuff is happening, but a lot of that isn't until later in the movie. I don't know how I got talking about Dunkirk, but the structure and weapons, when we finally get to Alex's chapter, I just wasn't thrilled with it. I mean, Alex did a great job, right? Like the kid actor did a fantastic job. What was his name? Carrie Christopher. But that section is just such an exposition dump. It felt like we were building up, building up, building up. Now here, Zach needs to explain all the things so the plot makes some sense. And to me, a lot of that was just disappointing. Like, here's why the cops and FBI didn't dig deeper into Aunt Gladys, because she just made up a lie and they were lackluster about following up with it, I guess. Okay. There's just a lot of things where it became harder for me to kind of buy into the world that Zach had created once we started getting into all of that stuff. I don't know if it would have been better if he started with that stuff and we just got a lot of the setup out of the way early and then got to the kids going missing at like the 20-minute mark and how terrifying that would be. I think I'd actually much rather start there. But that gets to, I guess, a second complaint, which Zach has said that he started writing this movie from a place of grief. One of his best friends passed away and he was really sad. So he started writing, and because he was already in this state of grief, he started the story from this place that the characters are also in a state of grief. And so he was writing with that in mind. Okay, these kids go missing. I'm going to explore that. And this community is in this state of grief. Okay. And he said he got, deep into the script before he finally switched gears and realized that I have to now make this all make sense. And that's when he started going back and adding the exposition and making it all kind of flow together. That's powerful in the sense that you're writing to your emotions. But I think what we're seeing here, the negative that happens, is that the movie is already kind of positioned and set up in a way that it pigeonholed him into this mystery and into this buildup, which then led to the exposition dump that I don't think is all that satisfying. And it might have felt a lot more taut and a lot more intense if we had just started with that stuff at the beginning and built up. Like, imagine if we started with Alex's perspective and built up to the kids in his class going missing and wondering, is anybody going to figure this out? What's going to happen? I think I prefer that story. But that also leads to the thematic issue, which is that Zach has said that he didn't really have a theme in mind. He just wanted to write about grief and characters experiencing it. So I'm somebody who's very much analyzing movies from a theory-based perspective and really looking at like techniques and theory and how those are used by the people making the film to maybe see what they had in mind or what the film is saying. So it's not necessarily relying on what the filmmaker felt, right? Or what the writer felt, but looking at these things in the movie and saying, okay, based on these things, and we know the theory about this is how character development is set up, this is how theme is set up, this is how the use of juxtaposition, and this is the use of defamiliarization, and just all these kind of concepts, you can kind of make sense of the work in the way that somebody would look at a blueprint of a house and be like, okay, they had this in mind with this room and they had this in mind with this room. An example of that is 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? The first section of that movie just shows these early human primates in their very bleak existence on the bottom of the food chain and what life is like without any tools or technology. All right, and I'm back. Had a newborn to feed and diaper change and then rock to sleep, and now she's sleeping soundly. So back to the point. So 2001: A Space Odyssey starts by showing these early humans in this space, and they don't have anything until the bone, right? This the aliens, the pillar, they have this bone, and then having the bone, they use it as a tool. And by having a tool, finally, they rise up the food chain, right? And then they throw the bone into the air, it spins, 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 and you get that famous graphic match of the bone becoming the spaceship. Now, that's not just a aesthetic thing. Like, isn't it cool that we matched a bone to a spaceship? Sometimes graphic matches are that, but the theory, the implication of the graphic match is usually that there's some kind of connection between the two things. You can have it to be where you might see a executioner's axe rise up and then start to fall, and it cuts to somebody slicing a carrot. And the implication isn't just that this is a match on the motion and there's no connection to the two scenes. It's that the carrot slicing finishes off the previous scene without getting into the gore and mess of it. So it's not always used with that kind of like intent, but it can be used with just like a short-term intent, but also a longer, more established connection, which is what we see in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is that this bone is a tool that essentially evolves into the spaceship, right? You go from the bone to arrowheads to fire to wheel to everything else until you finally get to the modern day in space technology. And that second section of 2001: A Space Odyssey is a contrast to the first section. So we saw humans without technology, and now we're seeing modern humans with technology, and the difference in how they behave, how they act. It's cool, but that's the theory too. Like, these two scenes being next to each other creates contrast, creates juxtaposition. So that's what I mean when I talk about theory and formal aspects and techniques of film and what you expect to see when somebody's utilizing these things. They're essentially like flags that you look for, or just like, oh, I noticed that, and the implication of this is this, so now I'm going to look for this. For example, in 2001, technology. Okay, we made this connection between the bone and the spaceship. Are we seeing a more technology advancement in the next chapter, which is where Hal's introduced? And it's like, okay, yes, we are seeing technology develop further. And then the last chapter, you transform or transcend beyond technology. And now the human isn't even needing a spaceship. Dave isn't needing a spaceship to get back to Earth because he's this transcended space baby. So technology ends up being the overall theme, like humans and technology and evolution. And you can get into a lot of conversations within that. So that's what I mean by a movie tends to, like, formally through theory showcase what it's talking about thematically. And with weapons, we just aren't getting that. All the things that you would expect to see theory wise, technique wise, form wise just aren't there, while you're getting the introduction of these concepts, the development of them, and the standard way these things develop in film, just not there, which makes me laugh because I'm seeing YouTube videos where people are saying, these are all the symbolisms and metaphor and things explained, like the themes explained in weapons. And as somebody who writes that content for a lot of movies, I didn't write it for weapons because the conclusion was that we don't have this coherent theory-based analysis that you could do, yet you have people that are proclaiming that they can. And Zach himself has said that no, nothing like the big machine gun in the sky or like assault rifle in the sky. He said that he has no idea what it means. And that doesn't mean that you can't make theories about it, but it also means that the intentionality that you expect or that you tend to give a work of art credit for or the benefit of the doubt around just isn't there when the filmmaker himself says like, nope, no idea. And there's a bunch of conversations. I know there's going to be people yelling like, just because the filmmaker says it's not there, you can still find the things that are there. But that's what I'm saying. The theory is in support of that. So a filmmaker could say that my movie's not about this, but if the theory is there and you can point out, well, this technique does this and this and this, and that adds up to this, and you can argue for it, then by all means argue for it. But I don't think that's there in weapons, and the filmmaker has confirmed that that's not there in weapons, and that's what makes it a little bit of an odd viewing experience, because it feels like it's setting up something, and then by the end of the film you don't get anything in that regard. It's just purely plots. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the ending itself, and I don't mean the kids chasing Aunt Gladys. That's exactly what it should be. That's perfect. It's the actual like ending after that. You just get Alex, or the little kid's voiceover that says Alex's parents still eat soup, and some of the kids spoke again, and then it ends. And I think that's very unsatisfying, and I'll tell you why. It's not because I'm somebody that needs everything wrapped up neatly and a bow tied on it. No. But there's an idea of balance when it comes to storytelling, and what's introduced at the start needs to have some resolution at the end. And I don't mean that in terms of resolution of everything's answered, but I just mean the reciprocal like idea coming back. I'll get into an example. If you start a story where somebody's talking about, I hate it at home, I really want to leave home, a weaker writer, not to be insulting to Zach here, but a weak choice, not a weaker writer, but a weak choice is to have that story build up to the person finally leaving home and just ending there. Like, oh, they left home. Aren't we proud of them? That's not what the story actually is about. The story's not about the person leaving home. The story's about the person experiencing what it's like to be away from home. And that's really what that story is asking for and what we should get from it. So if somebody really wants to leave home, we need to see what happens when they leave home. Are they happier? Are they not happier? Is it a mixed bag of good or bad? Do they want to go home? You can take that story in various ways to make a point, right? If they go off and life is better, then that's saying something. If they go off and it's a tragedy, that's saying something. You can take that in a lot of directions, but you actually need to see what happens when this person leaves. So with weapons, we don't really see. So much of the movie at the start is the town reacting to this tragedy. The kids go missing. It's Julia Garner's character reacting to this tragedy. Like, all these people are dealing with this grief and this emotion, and then they get the answers to what happened, right? We now know that there was this woman, Gladys, who had bewitched these kids. There's so much implication that the town and Julia Garner and all the individuals now have to deal with. Not just the fallout of like witches exist and this kind of mysticism exists, but also the loss of people, the loss of like Paul, like Julia Garner having to shoot Paul, like crazy, crazy things that the movie just doesn't explore and doesn't get into, because that's probably difficult. It's probably hard to write that last 5-10 minutes where the town has to sit there with the fact that like we blamed her and there was a literal witch doing this stuff. And do people lose their minds on that? Are they okay with it? What happens when they get their kids back and they have these like shells of kids? There's something there that's worth exploring that would put the punctuation on this movie. That's why when you're learning story structure, one of the things they talk about is it's not just the climax and then the end. There's resolution, there's denouement. It's where things kind of just come together. And again, I don't mean that as you need to put a bow on it and everything has to be pretty, but you do need a degree of balance just to show what happens. Like, now that people know what happened, how are they reacting? How are they feeling? And there's something powerful there. Like, I want you, just as an experiment, to think about movies that you really like and chop off the last 5 minutes. Like, I have a Fight Club poster behind me, right? Fight Club has that iconic ending where Marla and Edward Norton hold hands and the buildings fall and the Pixies are playing, and it's amazing and phenomenal. Imagine if it ended a few minutes earlier when Tyler shoots himself and Brad Pitt's character spins around and says, "Smells like smoke," or whatever he says, and collapses. The movie could have ended right there and people still would love it. They'd still praise it. It would still be probably an iconic film, but the movie's better off for having that last few minutes where you get people reacting and when you get the character having a moment of clarity that now that this like other person who is in his head is gone, how is he feeling? What is he thinking? Is he immediately sad? No, he feels content. He feels happy. And holding hands with Marla is a balance to the very beginning of the film where Tyler had the gun in Tyler's mouth, and you see that connection between them of violence, right? This weapon is the thing that's bridging between each of them. But then at the end, he's holding hands with Marla, and that's the bridge. It goes from something that's like vulnerable and cold and distant and scary to something that's human and connecting and full of love and passion, vulnerability. And that's the character journey. You don't get that if you end a few minutes earlier. So I'm not saying that Weapons needed 30 more minutes of story, but it needed something. And for whatever reason, maybe he had more of an ending and the studio told him to cut it. Maybe he didn't. But I think the movie would have been better off had they actually followed through with what the story was asking for, which is a bit of a reaction from the town about what happened. So those are my complaints and why I think it's not quite as good as I hoped it would be, but it's still a signal that we're going to need to pay attention to what Zach continues to do, because he is a special writer, a special filmmaker, and I hope for the next one he gets back to basics in some ways when it comes to the storytelling, and we see what he does, because I think it's just going to be better and better. And I do wonder if he's going to follow more of that Aster path, because I think you have Aster and Eggers right now, that you see Aster going more drama with still a kind of horror mixed into the drama, Beau is Afraid and Eddington. And then you have Robert Eggers, who also got his start in this more elevated horror space, but has stayed mostly in the horror space. He stepped out a little bit with Lighthouse, still kind of horrific. And then The Northman still added those elements, but then went back to Nosferatu. I do wonder if Zach's going to go more Ari Aster and go more that drama route and follow like Ari Aster, PTA, Tarantino even, or if he's going to go more like Eggers and stay a little bit genre, and not to use elevated horror more, but continue to add that kind of art house stamp to some of these horror films. So we'll see, but that's my thoughts on Weapons. That's the movie. Yeah. Until next time, lights, camera, see ya.